Go. 1, 2, 3. Hooray!
I come here like 2 or 3 times a week. I think this is the greatest facility there is for recycling.
You can do some of the hazardous waste things here, like motor oil, and you can do the batteries and the small electronics and stuff like that.
The residents of West Contra Costa County have a long history of taking action to protect the environment. In the early 1900s, garbage haulers from Berkeley dumped their loads into the bay in what is now Albany. Incensed local housewives were determined to block the garbage wagons.
The housewives actually, they couldn't get their husbands in Albany to prevail on Berkeley to stop it. And so after the husbands went to work one day, they actually armed themselves, the wives did, and stopped the trucks from coming in. And so that's how the city of Albany got started. So it's been going on for more than 100 years.
When I was a boy growing up, like I said, my grandparents and so forth, still smashed cans, kept all this stuff. World War II, they did that. They used it as landfills, thinking you dig it back up, it was steel. When we were children ourselves, we'd take a wagon, go out the highway, pick up bottles and sell them. And so that concept was always in our life, if you will. And we always reused things. There was nothing unusual about it. That was the normal thing. If you had boxes, you took them back to the store and used them again until they wore out, all that kind of thing. What began to change was the companies began to manufacture things that could be thrown away, consumables, if you will. The plastic bottles and things like that came along later.
By the 1960s, El Cerrito, like most of America, had settled into a comfortable lifestyle in which packaging and disposable products went straight to the landfill.
My dad burned the garbage in the backyard. So every Saturday, the San Francisco Bay Area was a disaster. And we could look out of our home and see all the tires in the bay. It was a pretty big mess.
Anything you didn't want would go into the trash. And nobody worried about it. Even the garbage company didn't worry about it. They took it to the dump and the landfill got filled. I think we had recycling of newspapers for quite a few years. I remember back in the 40s and 50s that you could bundle up your newspapers and the Boy Scouts or somebody would pick them up. And of course, people knew that bottles could be recycled and cans, particularly aluminum cans, but both kinds, could be recycled. There were some folks in El Cerrito that wanted to recycle themselves and wanted to put the word out so that other people could recycle, and it was voluntary. I think this started in the late 1960s.
Ken Little, a community member and Parks and Recreation Commissioner, came before the El Cerrito City Council with a proposal to get recycling going on a bigger scale.
He asked the city for 2 things. One was a little plot of land where they could start it on a bigger scale, and secondly, a loan. And it was, I think he asked for a couple $100 loan, and I don't remember if it was to fence the place or to buy a used truck, what it was for, but he said that they would be able to pay it back. And I recall the feeling on the city council at that time is, this is never going to work. But they're asking for so little, give them a chance. And so we did. We provided a space up in the old quarry at the top of Schmidt Lane, and they started recycling there. Somebody came up with the name ecology, which we all thought was cute, because it's ecology, but with a capital E and capital C for El Cerrito, so it was pronounced ecology.
At that time of the recycling center, about 71, there was that split where people understood the need to conserve and save and recycle, and that was just the beginning of the throwaway culture. So they were doing what they could to swim upstream, if you will. But it worked very well because there were so many older people that were educated people who were cooperative. So many groups helped. The city council helped, I said the scouts, church groups. Ultimately the court helped, actually sent us people to help work here as part of the community service. So there was just a lot of cooperation, and the attitude was a very positive, let's really do something about it. So, and they did.
On August 5th, 1972, Ken Little and a group of volunteers opened a small recycling center at the old quarry site. 33 people came that day to drop off their bottles and aluminum cans.
We started out with a bunch of barrels and a bunch of volunteers, separating bottles that we could recycle and sell back to the wineries, and separating the aluminum from the tin and that sort of thing. That's how it started. And in the wintertime, it was in the mud. It was kind of nasty.
In the early days, operations at the recycling center were very primitive.
Before they built the glass crusher, the bottles were crushed by hand. We'd put them in a barrel, and then with a hammer we'd break them. And we were always encouraged to wear safety glasses, of course, but it still was a pretty primitive operation. Same thing with cans. We would smash them by hand so that they would, more of them would fit into any particular container.
I was introduced by George Farrell, who was a member of Arlington Community Church. And George one day came to me and said, you know, we're building this recycling center. I said, I don't know what a recycling center is. So I explained a little bit, had a pamphlet on something called a glass crusher. And they said, well, we want to get a lot of bottles and just break them up so that they take up less volume. And the units that we can buy are too expensive. Can you build one for us? Well, I'd been volunteer for a lot of other things, so I looked at it and figured there was $300 or $400 worth of materials. And so we kind of struck a deal and said, hey, we'll go and build one. And with my welding stuff out in the street, we welded up this big monstrous box. It had a shaft, and it had half a dozen star-shaped pieces on it that went through fingers. And as it went through the fingers, then any bottle in there got smashed. So we put that thing together, and we put it on the back of a truck and took it down to the center and put in the first box of bottles, and we almost went deaf at that moment. It was terrible.
As recycling operations got more organized, ecology spread the word through the city newsletter, local newspaper, and church and neighborhood groups. In 1976, the Oakland Tribune reported that the old quarry had become one of the busiest and noisiest spots in town.
Other surrounding cities did not have recycling programs, and so those who were interested in recycling, such as from Albany or Richmond or Kensington, would come to our recycling center. And that made our center a little bit more successful because we had a larger volume, and therefore we had more interest from people who would pick it up and take it to the mill. And that created a financial basis that made the recycling center go.
By 1977, the recycling center was open every Saturday, and the collection of materials had expanded to include Christmas trees, cardboard, and paper bags. The volume of material and work increased to the point where it became too much for volunteers, and in May of 1977, the El Cerrito City Council started talking about making ecology a city program. Joe Witherall, Parks and Recreation Commissioner, helped find ways for the city to support the recycling center without spending money from the general fund. He secured a $45,000 grant from the California Waste Management Board for operations and applied for funds from the CETA program to pay salaries.
We had two pots of money in this community. One pot, the CETA program, which was to educate and involve young people and get them jobs for the future. And the second program was the block grants program under the Nixon administration for community development. That's how this thing really got going, because we were able to use CETA funds to hire young people to come out and open the center up 7 days a week.
On July 1st, 1977, the city of El Cerrito took over the recycling center and set the goal of eventually recycling 25% of the city's solid waste. With city support, the center grew quickly, and in the fall of 1977, the center received a second state grant for $90,000. The money was used to pave the site, buy new equipment, and construct an open-sided pole barn that became the signature feature of the center for nearly 35 years. In the summer of 1977, the city surveyed residents about their interest in a curbside recycling program. Response was overwhelming, and on September 6th of that year, curbside recycling began with 418 households participating.
The collection vehicles were modified pickup trucks that would be a workers' compensation nightmare today if anyone were to look at them. They had steel bins way up high that you had to throw materials up to get them into.
When the drivers would go out, because there wasn't an identifiable container out at the curb, it was a scavenger hunt. You would just sort of drive down the block looking and trying to guess if that was a stop. And usually people would get it out to the curb and it would be in a brown paper bag or a container of some sort. But not necessarily. So one of the things I did was write a grant for containers, and we were able to get the 5-gallon buckets, 2 of them for every household, to separate the cans and bottles, as well as then they could still put paper out. It also helped us find the stops when the drivers were out there.
After we come back from the route, we have to come in and work in the site, and we used to separate the commingle, from any stuff what was, sometimes was garbage, so we have to remove the garbage. Sometimes we have to separate plastic from the glass, from the tin, from the aluminum, and put it on each container to be, later on to be make on bales.
We attempted to keep lists of who was setting out each week and eliminate duplicates. We had about a 25% on any given day or week's routes participating.
We bought one of the new curbside trucks that were designed for curbside recycling. It was made by Lodall, and it was a self-dumping. It was a low entry height, so the driver would stand up and drive, and they could step in and out easily. And then the dumping into the truck was also a lower height for the drivers, and it could hold, I think, the equivalent of 3 of these other trucks.
In the late 90s here, the facility's been up and running for a good 20, 25 plus years, and it's been well used. People have grown up with it around here. They've known that it's a place that they can come to for decades, but the infrastructure was really starting to suffer. The old pole barn was starting to degrade. There was a lot of investigation into the potential changes regionally and here in the facility as to what was going to be done with recycling. A number of cities got together on a regional basis to implement statewide mandates of AB 939 to reach 50% recycling, and there was a question as to whether and how El Cerrito should participate in those regional endeavors.
First it was like, let's just replace the pole barn and get a new pole barn, and then it became more like, this building we're in, we need to replace that too, and we need to have room for these different operations. So the last couple years of my time there was a lot more devoted to what's the new recycling center going to look like.
There was a significant project that was pushed through between 2005 and 2008, where the city went out for an RFP for design and got an architect on board to design a new facility. We've been saying we're going to build a new recycling center for over 10 years. Time's now, let's make it happen. And we were very fortunate at that time to bring on Melanie Mintz as the Environmental Services Division Manager, because she'd had experience with big projects, doing some pretty complicated and creative things and involving the community.
So we reevaluated what we were doing up there, and there was multiple trends that fed our evaluation, just what's happening in the current recycling world and who is El Cerrito and what do we want to be doing. And as we did that, we found that we don't really need to be doing our industrial operations up there. That was expensive to build a state-of-the-art facility. And we realized we didn't have to. We'd been doing something we'd been doing for 20, 30 years, and that now there were places we could bring our curbside recyclables. And by moving that off-site, it gave us more room and more money left over to be able to do what we wanted to do on site, which was focus on the types of things that you can't collect curbside.
We wanted to essentially take recycling and reuse to the next level and provide opportunities for residents not to do what they've been doing, but to rather do most materials, by adding batteries and styrofoam and sheet plastics and all the other things.
We started asking the question of how to get this done and going into an RFP process late 2009, early 2010. We were able to get proposals on the table by fall 2010, select a contractor in early 2011.
We tried a new approach, which was a design build, and what we were able to do was, by looking at and modeling the amount of looking at our revenues, looking at our expenses, and modeling it over a decade essentially, we were able to see very accurately and very closely what our revenues and expenses are, what we're going to need, and how much we think we can reasonably spend on this. And we decided what the price was that we could afford, and that's what the proposers essentially bid against.
We could also see how we worked with them. That was a really important part of design build, is it's a very collaborative process between the designer, the builder, and the owner, the city. So we went through that competition, and we ended up with Pankow, Knoll and Tam, whose design both really best met what our program needs were and our goals. And like I said, the competition is a best value competition, so who can give us the most for that $2.8 million? Not only who meets our baseline requirements, but who then adds what's called project enhancements, and their team added numerous enhancements.
We were really lucky to have a good client. The city of El Cerrito told us from the beginning they were very interested in green building, and that support helped us to do innovative technologies like the rainwater cistern, the PV panels that you see here, and even the modular building. All of that was their support in bringing a maximum green effort into a fixed budget.
We had the opportunity to use Pankow's many resources. They have many buildings that they've done. They've worked with modular building before. They had great expertise in environmental design and construction.
We wanted the new center to be a very welcoming site so that not only current users who were already used to using the site, but additional users could use it, so more El Cerritans and neighbors could recycle. We wanted it to be a more intuitive site, that you could really discover new ways that you could utilize it easily, just by good signage and good wayfinding. One of our key goals was separating our back of house and front of house operations so that we could focus on both better and not have as many potential points of conflict between our crew driving around forklifts and customers coming to learn and participate in recycling. To be able to expand our capacity, to be able to increase our ability to generate revenue for the program. Community was really at the core. How could it really feel like a community center that people would really utilize? The center is embedded within the Hillside Natural Area, and we wanted it to feel like it was embedded. One of the things we wanted to do is we wanted it to fit within its natural surroundings.
This old quarry that had this nice horseshoe shape, that circle shape really started to sink in and settle in to help form and create the shape that we see today. So what we have on site are steel structures, galvanized steel structures with these large concrete bases. We have some simple forms which are unique in the way that they are butterfly shaped, and that shape does a couple things. One, it allowed maximum light in. So the idea was on that south face to open up as much of the facade or the area as possible to allow that light to enter in deep into that operations space.
That'll be your outside bundle. Right here, right? 202 is the ones we're going to start on.
Well, working with Pankow and a contractor in a design build scenario is that right away you've got the architect, the contractor, and the owner as a team on board all at the same time. I think we were, from the very beginning, on the same page when it came to the goals of this project from our design point of view, construction point of view, and the client. Having the contractor on board, with their subs as well, we're able to almost instantaneously get feedback and information on costing, constructability issues out at the site, and then take those issues right to the client. They're well in tune with what we're doing and giving us, green light go, red light no.
This is a modular building. It's actually built in Sacramento by Zeta Communities. It's built in a very efficient manner in a factory, so that helps to lower the price. Modular building is generally about half of site-built construction. The other thing is it allowed work to happen in parallel. For instance, while we were doing a lot on the site, they were doing a lot in the factory, and we were able to work without them essentially in the way, and then bring the buildings in nearly complete. And it was designed by our team, both the architect, Loisy Subalodi, who is our energy consultant, to really be daylit. You can see what this clerestory area is called a monitor, that's what we call it. And the idea was by popping up the roof here, and if you'll notice from the outside, flaring out the other roof sections here, you invite a lot of light into this space. We kept the walls light so it would reflect within the space. And ideally, with all of these windows, there'd be very little electric light on during the day.
You don't even really need any additional lighting in the workspaces, and it feels very pleasant. You don't have the overhead buzz of fluorescence. There's none of the, the kind of the vibrating you get with those. And I know, I personally don't like an overly lit environment. The new administration building in particular is a real jewel that we didn't have before, and it's a much more comfortable environment to both to work in, to provide service. And
a lot of what we're doing is very, very low energy use. LED lights, daylit building, things like that allow for very, very low energy use to match with the energy generation that we're getting from the PVs. Yeah, one of my favorite features on site is the rainwater cistern. It collects rainwater off of this 5,000 square foot upper roof of the operations shed. From there, it's funneled down here into what we call a sump. This is sort of a collection tank. And then it's piped underground to the big rainwater cistern. This cistern is over 11,000 gallons of water, of which we can use for both irrigation and flush fixtures within the building. What you're seeing here is a rain garden, or otherwise called a bioswale. We use both terms here. And it's actually well engineered. Our civil engineer put this together for us. So what you can imagine is the site carved up into little pie shapes. So for one portion of this site, the water is to channel off of the site in through these curb cuts into this. So water will come into here, it'll filter through the various levels of soil and rock, and then get to a pipe that'll then channel it into the storm drain. So it's a filtration system. One of the things that we wanted to do, our big energy story, was included solar panels. We wanted to make sure that we didn't just slap solar panels on a project. So the proper way to do it is to first minimize your energy use. So we looked at the Zeta building, for instance, and noted how it was going to be well day lit, so we wouldn't need to use lighting as much. As you see around the site, there's also LED site lights, which use very little energy. So once we minimize the energy as much as possible, then we decided to put on an appropriate amount of PVs. These photovoltaics will provide more than enough energy to power everything that goes on within the building. Also, being in this giant quarry, we noticed that the daylight is at times limited. So what we found was the optimal place, facing southwest a little bit, for these photovoltaic panels to get the most daylight.
I was very nervous about our first day of operation. We've been looking at the facilities design on paper for the last couple years now, and all along it was very exciting to think it was, what it was going to look like and how it was going to work and how the community was going to respond to it. And I was expecting some minor chaos that really hasn't come true. I think the community's really understanding and figuring out how to use it just the same way they did before. The nice thing is that the overall sense of place for this new center isn't all that different from the old facility, and it operates in much the same way. We just take more, and it's easier to figure out where to go, and it's safer, and we can accommodate more people and more material at once.
What was really great about the El Cerrito Recycling Center, and I think it's still that way today, it's sort of carried on that way, is it's a community-based recycling center. It serves the community. And it's small enough that you can just try things, that it's not a big elaborate deal. If you want to try to do something new, you can make that happen. So we were always trying new things. For example, there was a book exchange. People were starting to drop off books, and there was a little teeny bookshelf. And I had one day a Boy Scout came in and who wanted to do a project, and so I had him build bigger bookshelves, and there was a whole book exchange that happened.
It was set up to be a place where community members brought books and took books and exchanged books. Essentially a free resource for our community. Became very, very, very popular over the years, and so we've taken some steps in the new facility. We've expanded the book exchange to be an entire exchange zone. It's a covered, protected area where we've got, I think 4 or 5 times the amount of shelving we had before. And it's a space where community members can take and bring not only books and magazines, but also DVDs, CDs, tapes, art supplies, school supplies, office supplies, really any small exchangeable item that's safe and appropriate.
We have periodicals or any other books that we want to get rid of. We take them here and drop them off. I like vintage books, old books, anything from the early part of the 20th century. I just collect those, and some craft books.
We want this to actually be something you enjoy doing. You didn't just have to come here to recycle, but you wanted to come here to recycle. And
one of my favorite things is just the connection to all components of our facilities and our operation. We can see so much of the public drop-off area, and we know what's going on, and whether there's a problem or just even to see just how much activity is going on. There's a direct connection to our customer service front lobby, and we can all hear and interact and answer questions with the public. And there's a lot of connection to the back of the house operations. We get to have more interconnectivity between our administrative staff and our operational staff by virtue of sharing the same space.
it feels right. It feels like it's working. It feels like the facility that we wanted now, and it feels like a facility that will kind of grow and evolve in the future and creates the opportunities that we thought it would.
It's very popular these days to bash public enterprises and publicly run operations, and there's been a great move to privatize a lot of government services, but I think that they have shown that government can run an efficient, effective program.
If you don't have something like this, people are going to search out the dump, and rather than stuff getting recycled, it's going to end up in the waste. So it's a nice opportunity to see the stuff get back into circulation.
I throw the magazines into the magazine bin, and then I take some out for the week or two, and then we come back and I throw those back in and take some out. So it's nice to give it and it's nice to get it.
Well, it has improved a lot. We have more things to recycle here. They just remodeled it like a year or so ago, so it's better now.
And this is a great resource for the residents of El Cerrito. They ought to be proud that they can support something like this. This should be in every city.
Our goal is to stay a step ahead, and I think where El Cerrito was very ahead and very forward-thinking with the first center, we let ourselves fall behind. I think now we're back ahead, and I think our goal is to always stay on the cutting edge with what's the next thing.